Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Paul Elam with A Voice for Men, and I am sitting here today, not exactly with, I'm actually halfway around the world from Mr. Rob Tiller, who is sitting there in Perth, Australia right now. And we're going to talk a little bit about some things that have been happening in his professional life that I'm sure you guys are going to want to know about. How you doing, Rob?
I'm good, Paul. Thanks for having me on your show.
My pleasure. Let's just start with you telling your story. I mean, this is something, like I said, that my audience is going to want to know about. So if we can start from the beginning, and if you can just tell your story to us, what's been happening in your life?
Sure thing. I've been living in Perth for about 12 years. Like I was telling you before, I grew up in Texas. I grew up on a cattle ranch. So yeah, that lived lived in Texas until my late 20s and moved to Australia. Trained as a counselor in my early 30s. I had a background in psychology. I studied at Texas A&M, got my undergraduate there, and in 2007 I started working for
Sorry.
my first. That's all right. My first agency in Perth. I worked with those guys for about 3 years. I started out running domestic violence groups for men, as well as counseling clients, individuals, couples. I was with my first gig about 3 years, and then moved over to Relationships Australia, which is the organization I've been with for about 8 years, up until March, when the executives called me into their office and blindsided me, really. I expected that I was going into a meeting that was going to be the picture I had painted for me by one of my managers was that it was going to be a reprimand. And so just a little bit back, before I talk about the meeting, I've been working with this new agency, still wearing my counseling hat. So working with a lot of couples, a lot of men actually. I was the only male counselor in the Perth headquarters of this agency. They have a number of branches around the state. It's actually Relationships Australia it's a national brand, so to speak, but each state has its own governance. So each state has its own, I guess, policies and how they run their own show. And so Perth. So I was doing counseling 2 days a week, and then I was running workshops. So I was running professional development. So I would go out into the community and show up to different government agencies, or I'd go to schools and do a variety of different trainings, from dealing with angry and aggressive customers, to dealing with angry teenagers, to sex and intimacy courses for men. So I ran quite a range of different workshops for Relationships Australia. So those were the two hats that I wore, and I pretty well, in the 8 years I was there, had an unblemished record. And last year, after my performance management meetings, I had them annually. And because I worked in two different sections of the organization, I'd have, two managers, two performance management meetings. And last year, both my managers went to bat and said, hey, this guy's awesome. He's an asset to our organization. Give him a pay bump. They did. And so in terms of my work, it's my passion. And I've dedicated pretty much my professional life to getting good at working with couples, but mainly there's been a passion in terms of, as well as public speaking, in terms of workshop delivery. That's been a real challenge for me because I grew up, like I said, in a bit of, well, I didn't say I grew up. I did say I grew up on a cattle ranch. So it's quite a socially isolated kind of, yeah, environment. And I guess what I'm saying is the thing I heard most often from my mother was stop mumbling. So I wasn't a great communicator. So becoming decent at public speaking was a real, personal challenge to myself. And so I've been dedicated is what I'm getting at. And I've actually become quite, I feel like I've become good at dealing with a difficult couple, or dealing with, a lot of different issues that my clients would actually bring in to my office or to the groups I was running, to the workshops I was presenting. I was just really finding my stride, Paul. And then I guess I got taken down from, and
to
lost my
clarify
job.
for people, this goes back to your posting an article by Bettina Arndt on the incidence of domestic violence, and just highlighting the fact that that it isn't necessarily a gendered problem, that men and women both can be perpetrators and victims of domestic violence. And you posted this to your personal Facebook page, and then had some conversations pursuant to that posting, and you were brought in, and what happened?
Yeah, so I posted the article, and like you were saying, I'm a member of it's called the Men's Focus Group. So it's a professional men's network. We meet monthly. There are other men who provide services to men for different organizations, and we bounce ideas off each other, and we talk about men's issues, and we talk about our challenges and struggles as men working in the field that we work in, dealing with the issues that we have to deal with, primarily working under female executives and managers, and so it's kind of the one space where we can let our hair hang down, so to speak, and just talk shop with each other. And so we got into a bit of an email conversation, and like all the other guys in this group, I would use my work email address. My work knew about this group. They knew I was a member of this group. A couple of times a year, they would allow the group to be hosted at Relationships Australia. So they were totally privy to the fact that I was a member of this group. And I had an email, we had an email exchange about the statistics and the research that was contained in Bettina's article around domestic violence. And she was, like you were saying, she was saying that there are a lot of cases of two-way domestic violence where, and a lot of cases where actually the female partner incites and provokes and escalates the violence from her end. And so Relationships Australia has a more Duluth-based victim perpetrator model of domestic violence. And
I want to
and
hold you up there just for a
yeah,
moment, Rob, for the
please
handful
do.
of people in this audience that may not know what the Duluth model is. It is a male perpetrator model, and it's based on feminist theory that domestic violence is defined by the extension of male power into the home, the male privilege, male power, patriarchy, that power in the home abused, and therefore it relies on a gendered version of what domestic violence is. In other words, if you have female perpetrators, then
Mhm.
the Duluth model doesn't work. Um,
Exactly.
which is another way of saying that the Duluth model doesn't work, because there are female perpetrators. There's all kinds. And as we know from Bettina's research and from what Erin Pitsey has done and what Murray Strauss did, and any number of very, very gifted researchers in the field, we know that, for instance, most of the unidirectional violence, or one violence going one way in relationships, is perpetrated by women. The CDC estimates that's about 70% of unidirectional violence is perpetrated by women, and most of the violence that's left over is reciprocal. It's two-way. Is that, by the way, I want to ask, is that consistent with your work experience working with couples?
Well, that's the thing about it, Paul. When Bettina's article came out, there was an element of finally, somebody is telling the truth, because this is what I've been seeing from the beginning. I couldn't. I was trained early on in the Duluth model in the first agency I was working for. The men are perpetrators, the women are victims. And I was told that when you're running these domestic violence groups, if the guy starts talking about what she did, you shut him down and you make it about him. And so I ran those groups for a couple of years, and I just couldn't stomach it anymore, Paul, because it just did not fit with what I was hearing and observing, and I couldn't do it anymore.
Did that cause
And,
any
and
conflicts
in
for
terms
you
of,
at work?
sorry,
Did that cause
so
any conflicts at work for you?
say that one more time. Sorry.
I was asking if that caused any conflicts at work for you, that you couldn't do the same routine anymore in
Well,
good
that
conscience.
was my first gig, and then so fast forward 10 years down the track, and I'm seeing a lot of this, not always violence, but high levels of aggression, high levels of what we call emotional dysregulation, which means that both partners lose their shit and take it out on each other. And I would see that all the time. And so I got real interested in, well, how do you deal with both partners? Because I've only been trained in how to deal with men from a particular treatment perspective that's in terms of producing outcomes with couples. It doesn't. It puts all of the blame on the men. It doesn't actually acknowledge, and in a way, it excuses a lot of the bad behavior that comes from the ladies. And so from the personal intensive training that I've done for a number of years, it's been learning how to address particularly lady style aggression and lady style passive aggression and lady style manipulation and lady style violence, because I got good at working with the guys early on. It took me a lot more, I guess, training
Well,
and
yeah,
focus.
relational aggression is a lot more complicated.
Exactly. And so it's been a long-term project of mine of actually working with both genders in a couple to actually get them to a place where they start checking those destructive behaviors within themselves and within the relationship, which then means the treatment outcomes or the success rate of my work or my interventions has been going up over the years.
And was this what you were practicing at Relationship Australia?
It was.
Style of work, and there was no objection to it?
Well, in some ways I had to, because I wasn't working in their domestic violence program, and because I was getting the client feedback that I was getting, and because most of the time the executives stay in the corporate office, I just show up and do my job, and my managers left me alone.
Okay. Well, until you posted an article by Bettina Arndt.
Exactly. And I mean,
So
even because like I was saying before, I was the only male counselor in their head office. And so monthly we would have group supervision, and I work with kind of, 50 plus lady counselors, and all, maybe not all of them, but a large percentage of them in our group supervision sessions, they would always say, it's so good having you here because you give voice to the male perspective. You give us insight into what's going on into our male clients' minds. And so they actually valued me. My colleagues valued me and my contribution. And yeah, I'm from Texas, so I'm a bit of a, I know how to wrestle steers to the ground. I mean, I got some, some, and I brought a bit of that to the space. And because you got to have that when you're working with men.
So tell me, what happened in this meeting, however much detail you can go into here? I know that you're initiating legal action about this, but can you tell us exactly what happened in the meeting?
Sure. So how it got to be a meeting, Paul, so a member of this meeting who I would consider a bit far left in terms of his politics. I mean, he's got a PhD in gender studies, so I think that's about as far left as you can get. But, decent guy to have a debate with. And I think some of the guys in the group have expressed to me some concerns around his mental health over the past year or so, thinking he's really struggling. So what this guy did, because this email exchange happened almost 2 years ago.
Okay.
This happened when the article first came out. And so what happened is somehow I came up on his radar. He goes back into these emails. He prints them out. Then he goes to my Facebook page and takes a couple of screenshots of some New Yorker style cartoons that are poking, a little bit of fun at feminism. And he puts together a bit of a package. And then he calls one of my managers at Relationships Australia, and he says he's got some deep concerns about my how did he put it? Cult-like political views.
They have another word for it. It's called wrong speak.
Wrong speak.
Straight out of Orwell. So basically what happened was you had an ideologue, a gender studies major, a feminist ideologue, saw that you weren't towing the feminist line, saw that you were in fact challenging some feminist thinking, and even, God forbid, poking a little fun or finding some cartoons about it. And that was enough to warrant destroying your career, despite having a stellar record for years where you were. You didn't see this coming?
Not at all. I was totally blindsided. My manager, she was trying to get her head around it all because he called her initially, but she had to take it upstairs to the executives. And from how she was pitching it to me, she was saying, they'll, at worst, they'll reprimand you. They'll basically take you in and say, don't do that again, or, don't use your work email address to have those kind of conversations, and clean up your Facebook page. I mean, that was where she was sitting with it. And I mean, and this lady's always had my back. And so I trusted her. And the executive director was away at the time on leave. And so this stretched out to be about a month from the time he called in to the time I ended up in the CEO's office sitting with her and the executive director. And about halfway into the meeting, I got pretty clear that this wasn't a conversation about, don't do that again. This was, you're out, buddy.
And what is the precise, did they give you a precise reason? What was the official reason for, now I understand they demanded your resignation and you gave it to them. That was in lieu of being fired. So it's the same thing as being fired. It was either.
Apparently they call it constructive dismissal over here, but it's
constructive dismissal.
for basically.
Oh gosh, I've been constructively dismissed a couple of times, I guess. But that's strange. But did they give you, for this constructive dismissal, did they give you a reason that you needed to be constructively dismissed?
Well, so I was in the meeting for an hour and a half, and so like I was saying, about 45 minutes in, the light bulb went off in terms of they're trying to give me enough rope to hang myself here, but they've already hung me. They just want to watch me, like a fish out of water, flail and die.
And hoping that you would give them more ammunition. Yeah, in the process of that meeting, sure.
And I feel like I maintain, my composure and I also, towards the end, I called the CEO out. I said, so where is it? Because the accusations were you breached our domestic violence policy by sharing Bettina Ott's article, and then having a subsequent conversation on your work email address. And the thing about it, Paul, is every day, every single one of my colleagues, well, maybe not every day, every single colleague, but we all share articles, we all share links, we all share, we all have conversations about, new ideas. It happens all the time. And so I breached their social media policy with the Facebook cartoons, with 2 Facebook cartoons that were totally mainstream. Totally, they could have come out of the New Yorker magazine. And then I breached their domestic violence policy by having an email conversation with this professional men's group with my Relationships Australia email address. And so I said to the, yeah?
Well, I'm just sitting here wondering, in the midst of all this, did anybody defend you? Did your immediate supervisor, any of your coworkers, has anybody step forward to say, hey, what's going on here? This is a good, effective counselor? And
there was a bit of a shitstorm because I work upstairs in community education. That's where the workshops are run. I worked downstairs in counseling. Uh, Upstairs and downstairs, the admin ladies, my colleagues, they all had my back. And they went to bat for me, and they were outraged, and they were saying, "What the hell are you guys doing? Uh, what are you thinking?" So they really had my back. But the thing about it is the executives never spoke to my manager on the workshop side of things. They never spoke to my manager in the counseling side of things. They didn't allow them input. This was strictly an executive decision based on politics.
And that would seem to be the politics of the day in Australia, as it were. I know that a lot of my viewers are going to be very familiar with what happened with Cassie Jaye in the Red Pill movie. I also wonder, and I want to sort of compare these two dramas because they're very, very similar. But were you aware of what was going on with the Red Pill movie before all this happened?
Totally. Yeah, I followed Cassie Jaye's story from the moment before she got to Australia, they were canceling her movie. And I mean, Bettina was speaking up about it. And so, I mean, I generally keep an ear towards Bettina. And so that's how I knew that, you know, these feminist writers like Clementine Ford and the big names were gunning for Cassie Jaye and actually stirring up enough crap to get her movie thrown out of these major showings.
Many venues, and you know, of course, the irony of it. Clementine Ford and those like her are some of the most hateful people you could possibly ever want to run across. It's absolutely despicable, and it seems like that the standard of the day for Australia right now is to favor what amounts to hateful groups of people and silence any rational discussion. And I want to offer an idea and get your thoughts on it, because my thinking is, and having I worked in chemical dependency for 30 plus years, and as you can imagine, there's high incidence of domestic violence in this population. And when you ignore victims or perpetrators of any kind, one of the things that you're doing is you're ignoring the struggle of their children. When you can't accept that a woman is abusive, when you have to shut down the guy when he starts talking about what she did, ultimately what you're at risk at there is abandoning a child that's in trouble and actually forcing them to continue to be subjected to the abuse of a perpetrator while you're blaming another victim, the husband. It's a horrible thing that I think is going on. And I can't tell you how many times I called DV shelters seeking some kind of services for men. And I mean, I was in a huge city, Houston, and I ended up calling places in Dallas and El Paso and Austin because there was no place in Houston for men to have a place to go. And I don't want to sidetrack off that too much, but we're talking about.
I see it all the time, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
And you're exactly right. That's the climate here. And there's a group called Our Watch. I think they're Sydney based, but the federal government recently, you know, there was some acknowledgement of male victims of domestic violence, and then they're saying, well, this group Our Watch is going to handle the male victims, and they're a feminist run organization. And basically what they're saying, their domestic violence policy is saying, well, okay, if you front up as a male victim, we've got to contact your female partner and corroborate the story.
That was after the 1 in 3 Foundation actually secured some funding for male victims. And then, of course, they turned over the distribution of that funding to feminist ideologues who would essentially harass men who showed up looking for help by threatening to report them to their perpetrators. Now, every other domestic violence service in the world offers escape routes for women. Even domestic violence websites have a quick button. You hit that and it takes you to Google or whatever, so that you don't get caught by the perpetrator looking for help. And so what they've offered up there is to to absolutely contact the perpetrator and report them and report the victim to them. It's absolutely insane.
So that's the climate. That's the Australian climate. But I mean, the thing about it is, for example, and we were talking, Bettina and I were talking about this with Miranda Devine on her radio program yesterday, that Relationships Australia in New South Wales, in their domestic violence policy, they are recognizing male victims. They are offering support services to male victims. So out of all of the Relationships Australias in Australia, they've got the most progressive, male-focused domestic violence policy of anybody. So it's starting to
Don't
happen.
say that too loud. Somebody will come shut them down.
Fair enough. Yeah, true.
Listen, if you had this to do over again, would you have gone ahead and offered your resignation, or would you have forced them to fire you? Because I know they didn't give you really any time to think about anything.
Well, the thing about it, Paul, is they had already resigned me. I came to knowledge after maybe three weeks after I resigned, or after I was forced to resign, that a couple of my clients found me through LinkedIn, because they weren't giving my clients any of my contact details. Most of my clients only knew my first name. Some of these people I've been working with for 5 or 6 years. Some of these people were highly traumatized. They basically said, Rob's gone. He's resigned. He's not coming back. But they told my clients who were booked in on Thursday, the 15th of March, they told them I had resigned on the 14th of March. I had the meeting with the executives on the 14th of March. I did not resign until the afternoon of the 15th of March. So they were already telling my clients the day before I resigned that I had resigned.
Well, I wish I could say I was shocked that they lied to your clients. And just as a clinical matter for people not in the know, just suddenly terminating services, if somebody has developed a relationship with a client, a therapeutic alliance with them that stretched over a period of years, just to walk in one day and say, oh, he's not here anymore, that is about the worst possible provision of service and treatment of a client that you can give them, is just to treat them so dismissively as to not allow them a chance to even say goodbye. It sucks. That's a terrible thing to do. Well, this seems to be going with the times, Rob. We have, Australia is not by any means the only country affected by this problem. They seem to be right now the most overt with the censorship and the harassment of people who don't toe the party line on feminism. But it's happening everywhere. I want to advise people that Rob is initiating. Have you secured an attorney? What's the status on your reaction to this legally?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been friends with Bettina for about a decade. We've worked on projects together, media projects together. She's been a mentor to me. She's been a friend to me, and now she's really going to bat for me. And so she's connected me with some of the legal people she knows, and so through those contacts, I have a lawyer who has been coaching me through this unfair dismissal process. Over here, they call it an unfair dismissal application with the Fair Work Commission. It is a legal body, but it's not like a court, and it's more, I guess, like a tribunal. with their decision being having legal the same weight as say a court decision. So yeah, I've got a lawyer through Bettina who's helping me, and I've got a few other characters who are helping me navigate. So I've got I've got a few people on my team.
Well, I would like to appeal to my audience to put a few more people on your team by way of going in. If you look in the description area to this video, you'll see a link to Rob's GoFundMe page for his legal defense from this. And folks, if we don't help him, who will? It's not like the world is just chock full of people who really care about men and what happens, or this kind of injustice. So it's up to us to do anything about it. Rob, is there anything that I haven't asked you in this that you would like to say about this case?
Oh, well, thank you for that, Paul. I really appreciate that. I guess, well, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, Paul, in terms of, I don't know how much I've spoken in our conversation about my interest in working with men. It's been, I was telling a mate of mine recently that it's taken me a lot of years to actually learn how to stand up in front of a group of men and speak in a way that actually holds their attention as well as invites them to action. And what I've learned in terms of those experiences where because I've run a lot of men's groups, I've run a lot of, I've spent a lot of time hanging out with groups of men, and I guess what I've learned is that I've got to speak from a place of honesty about my own background. I've got to share a bit of me with men to actually develop a sense of, I guess, develop credibility. When you're standing in front of a group of men, what I've learned is you gotta let them see that you're a fuck up too, and you gotta let them see that you've struggled, and you gotta let them see that there is no matter how deep they feel like they are in the shit, that there is a way out, and it's one step at a time. And that's been my experience in terms of my own life and pulling myself out of my own mud and crap. And so I love working with men, Paul. It's pretty much my passion. And probably that's, and I'm not sorry for what I've done, and I'm not sorry for, because in a way, Bettina's article is standing up for men. It's saying, yeah, as men, we can make a mess, and that's only part of the story. We choose partners, who make messes too, and who behave badly, and who have the same kind of demons operating in them that we do in us. And I guess, in terms of my interest in working with men and my interest in working with couples is, well, how do we deal with those demons? How do we deal with those dark parts of ourselves that I've been working with in myself, since I've been working on this stuff? How do we do it in ways that where I can effectively hold myself to account and my behaviors to account, and I can also hold my partner to account and her behaviors to account. and
Imagine that.
and it's taken me my whole life and my whole career to even kind of crack that nut.
You know, what I found over, gosh, 35 years of clinical work, one of the things that's no secret in our respective profession is that men are a lot more resistant to mental health treatment, I think much more so than women, particularly in the voluntary self-pay sector of people looking for help. And the mental health field has given them good reason to not seek help, because we tend to look at men as emotionally deficient. We look at them as inadequate women. We set the same clinical expectations on their work to emote, to express themselves, to deal with things in the same way that women do, and failing to acknowledge that men are different, that they have a different way of being, a different way of addressing issues in life. And we alienate them from the beginning by lecturing. And that's why I was really excited to hear about your excitement about talking to men in language they understand and that's not belittling them. I think we've lost a lot of men to suicide because our mental health professions aren't up to speed on what men need and how to deliver services to them and how to deliver, if you'll pardon my Texan language, some fucking respect to men. They're innately disrespected. And we're seeing a huge part of this come up in your circumstances. You posted an article from Bettina Arndt, who is, Bettina is, I guess, edgy by modern standards in some ways, but she's not an offensive person. She is a very good-hearted individual that does great work, does meticulous research. She puts the facts out there, invites open discussion about it, and that is threatening. And how can we have a mental health profession that services men, half the population, in any kind of way that is even remotely decent until we start fixing some of these problems? And I'm really glad to meet somebody else that is hopefully going to be a part of doing their part to fix this. And it does not surprise me that it's a fellow Texan. One of these days, we don't have time for it now, but one of these days I really want to hear about how you ended up from Texas to Australia. I always felt a special kinship with Australians. I think there is a lot of common denominators there between the two. But that's for another day. Rob, I want to thank you very much for your time, for what you're doing. I want to encourage everybody, again, go visit the description area. Go visit the GoFundMe page. Chip in a couple of bucks. Help this guy out, defend himself so that he can move on and help other men in a way that they're going to receive it in the future. Because if you think they're going to get it from Relationship Australia at this point, I wouldn't hold my breath. Not if they're doing this sort of thing. With that, again, thank you, Rob. Everybody else, you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next time around here.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.